Hello there, it's me again. Well, I wanted to make another video because my video about how to tune pianos and why to avoid equal temperament has been getting more attention than I expected and a number of interesting comments. I'm going to define well temperament and the difference between Thomas Young and other ways of tuning within the well temperament sphere near the end of this video. But there was two comments that I really want to spend a little bit of time discussing. Two of the most common complaints or concerns that a piano tuner is going to bring up is, first, that if you tune the piano any other way, it will damage it because the piano has been designed to be tuned to equal temperament. And second, that the piano will sound out of tune with other instruments. So let's deal with the first. So first of all, I can't tell you what to do with your piano. You have to make an educated choice, but let me tell you some considerations that I think will be pretty clear that this isn't a big concern. And well, first of all, I've tuned my piano this way. Throughout the entire 19th century, through part of the life of the piano, people tuned the piano in a Victorian temperament and with Thomas Young. So clearly pianos then were designed for well temperament, not for equal temperament. And I'm not aware of pianos being significantly redesigned or restructured as a result of the change to equal temperament. I think the design change would be minimal, if zero. And the difference in hertz between, both are tuned to A440, so the A string is the same. And so each of the A's is going to be an octave away. It's just minor differences within the other 11 notes. And those minor differences are, like I said, really minor. In fact, I made a little diagram just to show you. So if you imagine, so these pins right here, let me show you. These pins that you can see right here, they're basically like little screws that are drilled through. There's like cast iron, and then under the cast iron is the pin block, which is made of wood. And so these tuning pins are basically, so the strings are wound around that pin. These tuning pins are basically like a screw. And they are a screw. I mean, there's a screw action and a threading. And so if you imagine, it's basically the difference between what damages this screw more. To keep a constant tension like this, let's say I pull as hard as I can, or throughout time to go like this. Right? So that's the piano becoming, I don't know which season, but each year the wood in temperate climates expands and contracts, expands and contracts, expands and contracts. So this is why people suggest tuning the piano twice a year within temperate climates. That is to say, climates where there's winter, where there's dry season, humid season, heating season, like the four seasons, like in the Northeast. If you live in the desert of Arizona or something like that, where there's almost no humidity, you don't need to tune the piano as much because the wood isn't going to be expanding and causing the strings to tighten and loosen, which is part of what causes the piano to go out of tune. And there's also just, the tons of tension on those tuning pins that also causes it to detune over time. Well, the clear answer is allowing your piano to go out of tune. If I had put this screw, rather than putting it into wood, if I'd put it in drywall, it would probably be coming out, with this much tugging. But since it's into wood, it's solid. But if you imagine just putting tons of tension on this string, it would go out of tune. So all that to say is that keeping the piano at a constant tension, as long as that constant tension is pretty close to equal temperament values, I don't understand why that could make such a huge difference. The other comment that was brought up was that if a piano is tuned in, let's say, well temperament, Thomas Young, or anything else, you can't play along with other instruments, that it'll sound out of tune. Now, this too isn't true. The reason is that, sometimes if you tune, there are certain, let's say, Baroque oboes that are tuned in A435 rather than A440. And so, no, that's not, that'll sound terrible. It's enough that it's going to sound like a quarter of a tone or a half tone off from the other note, and you won't be able to play other instruments together. But again, like I've been saying, Well Temperament is really close to Equal Temperament, and a Victorian Temperament is really, really close to Equal Temperament. It's just like a little bit of color added to the notes that just makes it just a little more interesting, just a little bit more variety in the keys that makes the contrast between chord changes just a little more alive. And a little. That was another comment that I wanted to respond to, was somebody saying that for jazz, where you have a lot of chord changes, that Equal Temperament would be better. I would argue that the opposite is the case, but again, there's no other way to know than to ask your piano tuner to provide you with both experiences, or to tune your piano for 6 months or a year one way, and if you really don't like it, the next time the piano tuner comes around, you just ask for something else, or go back to Equal Temperament, and there's no loss. You know, you've just had an experience and you've learned something new. That's a good thing. I remember this piano came back from the shop, and the technician had very helpfully tuned it in Equal Temperament, and I was playing it, and I was really trying to get into it, and I just wasn't enjoying the music quite as much. I put it back in a Victorian Temperament, and I was much happier again. So getting back to how it will sound with other instruments, again, the differences are so minor that probably won't hear it. I mean, most people tell me that piano tuning seems kind of arcane, that they can't really hear a huge difference between a fourth that's beating, let's say, once per second, wah, wah, and like 3/4 of a time per second, wah, wah. It still sounds like a perfect fourth. To most people. And in the same way, a piano that's tuned slightly a different way, it won't sound hugely in tune or out of tune with other instruments. I mean, you'd have to be trying so hard to listen for it. And plus, like I said, if that were true, that you can't play a piano with other instruments that are tuned different ways, then piano in principle, you wouldn't be able to play it with other string instruments like the violin, cello, or any other instrument where you don't need, like a trumpet, I guess, where you don't have frets, you don't have keys. You can play any note by just adjusting your finger, which is something pianists can't do. So if that were true, then these other instruments, which in principle would always play pure intervals, purely perfect fifths, purely perfect thirds, you wouldn't be able to play with the piano, because why would they want to temper their fifths or thirds just because you, as the pianist, need to temper your fifths and thirds? But in reality, the difference is so negligible that nobody even knows that that in principle the piano is playing a different note than your violinist. But again, really the only way to find out is to try it, and to find out that it doesn't really sound that different. Thanks again for all the fun I've been having responding to comments and chatting with folks about piano and piano tuning. So yeah, thank you, and keep it up. It's been very, very enjoyable and really meaningful for me to create some content that people are discussing and finding interesting. By the way, I particularly enjoyed speaking with folks from other cultures that were, this somebody from some kind of Persian classical music person, YouTuber, has been chatting with me. It's been fascinating to hear about the Iranian or the Persian classical tuning system. It's really different from the Western one. I really invite people to check it out and check out some classical Persian music just to hear the difference. There's so many possibilities. So it's been a really good time. I do invite other people to show me other tuning styles. It's been a good time. So thank you for that, and take good care.